So, unless you've been living under a rock for the past year, you've probably heard about all the breaches that occur pretty much every week. And if you do this for a living like I do, and I'm sure many of you do as well, it's almost gotten to the point that we've become numb to it. It's just another day at the office. Open up your laptop, read about the sports, the weather, and the latest data breach. Really 2 points here. One is really just to drive home the sheer number of breaches we've seen in the last year or two. And the list of firms that I have up here is really just the tip of the iceberg. The second takeaway here I thought was kind of interesting is that not only are the bad guys going after high-profile retailers and financial institutions, et cetera, but they're also starting to go after security vendors, which is going to be a little bit embarrassing for the industry. And then the last point was just, this is actually a picture from, I think, Beach Blanket Bingo, which is a movie from the 50s. So moving on to the second slide, it's really no surprise then that preventing data breaches and the loss of sensitive data has become a pretty hot topic in security. And what the slide shows is the results of one of our most recent quantitative studies of data security spending intentions. And what it shows is that fear of data loss or data theft was identified as the #1 security challenge over the next 12 months. And just as a side note, this data was actually based on what we call the voice of the enterprise, where we conduct phone interviews with roughly 300 pre-qualified IT decision makers. The second point here is that the second biggest issue for the end users was actually the timely detection of attacks. And this illustrates a pretty big trend we've seen going on in security over the past few years, and has become somewhat of standard practice. But the idea is basically that as an industry, we've essentially thrown up our hands and said, okay, we admit traditional security defenses and legacy antivirus tools aren't 100% effective. They can't stop everything. And we know the bad guys will get in somehow. So the next best thing is detect it as quickly as possible and limit the damage. Number 4, timely risk visibility is similar in concept. One thing I want to point out here is that number 2, which largely is interpreted as being about mainly external threats, it actually ranks ahead of insider threats, which came in at number 5. And this is a little bit surprising, given some of the concerns we've had about Edward Snowden and the NSA and all the concerns about malicious insiders. And I think to some extent what this illustrates is, or what I'd like to get across anyway, is that it's getting a little bit harder to talk about insider versus outsider attacks. And partly because, as we'll talk about a bit in the upcoming slides, external attackers have actually gotten very good at masquerading as insiders. So some of the same techniques and tools that have historically been used to prevent against insiders can also help with external attackers. The next few slides, and this one in particular, the main point I want to get across is that while all these breaches seem to be different in a lot of different ways, what was stolen, who was attacked, how many credentials or records were taken, et cetera, et cetera. If you really start to look closer and you look at multiple breaches, you'll actually start to see a number of common factors in each of them that makes them look more similar. These cute little kittens. The first one's fairly obvious, but most attackers typically use some form of phishing or malware, maybe drive-by attacks on websites, social engineering, et cetera. And they look to gain a foothold in the organization and, typically plant some type of malware, a keylogger or something like that. The second is that they typically don't go directly for their high-value targets, but they go after low-level employees that are, in many cases, completely unrelated to what their ultimate objective is. Now, in addition to targeting low-level employees, another common trend that we're seeing is attackers are going after third-party or even fourth-party relationships as a way in. And we think this is going to continue to grow as an attack vector, partly because modern firms are using outsourcers, partners, suppliers more and more to try to improve profitability. Another contributing factor here is the growth of cloud computing. And that's really accelerating the reliance on third parties, whether it be AWS or Microsoft Azure on the infrastructure as a service side, or SaaS applications. And there have been numerous studies by cloud security vendors that show the average enterprise has anywhere from 600 to 1,000 SaaS applications running on their network, and a lot of them they don't even know about. My colleague and I actually gave a presentation at RSA conference last year, and we talked about this problem. And just to put some scope around it, but some of the firms we talked to, large financials in particular, had anywhere from 10 to 20,000 external vendors, and many of those had access to internal resources or had privileged access. So really the point of what I was trying to get at with this picture is, like this poor guy who probably has no idea where all these wires connect to, modern enterprises are having a really hard time keeping track of everyone who somehow touches their network or their resources. So we think this is a problem that's going to continue to get worse over time. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is that, at some point we're seeing almost all these attacks target privileged accounts or privileged users to get access to privileged credentials. And almost by definition, privileged credentials pretty much give you the keys to the kingdom. So, if attackers are looking to get valuable data, this is a pretty good way to do it. And once they get their hands on privileged credentials, it's pretty much just a matter of time before they get their hands on what they're looking for. A good example is in the case of Windows-based systems, a Windows domain admin pretty much has automatic access to all the resources and servers in the domain. So, not only does this present a ripe opportunity for a malicious insider, but it also presents a pretty big attack surface for an external attacker who can somehow, compromise a Windows domain admin's credentials. And of course, once the attackers, obtain those privileged credentials, they can not only access critical servers, they can create accounts, they can also do things like clean up their tracks and clean up activity logs, so it becomes really, really hard to know that they're in their network once they're there. And in fact, some of you may have seen there have been studies of Verizon data breach incident report, what have you. Most of them show that on average, most attacks are detected months after the initial breach, and in insult to injury, many firms find out they've been breached from a third party. So this next slide is a little bit of an apology because it's become a little bit of a cliche. It shows a castle or a perimeter, but it's really a pretty good metaphor for the way security has been done historically. And despite all the breaches that we read about, we still spend most of our money and resources building higher and thicker walls. And just to illustrate that point, 451 Research estimates that roughly $30 billion or so is spent each year on security products. That doesn't include services. And roughly half of that amount, if not more, is spent on perimeter defenses, firewalls, intrusion prevention, secure web gateways, antivirus, etc. And yet we still read about breaches almost every week. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of the definition of insanity, that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Now, why is this? One theory that I have is that most of the large enterprises I've worked with or were customers of mine, the networking team typically played a pretty big role in security. And guess what? People with a networking background tend to love shiny new boxes and blinky lights that they can plug into their racks and they basically be done with it. But the bottom line here is there's still a pretty big disconnect in terms of what we need to secure data and what we're actually spending our money on. So where do we go from here? And this brings me to our final slide. And if what we've been doing historically hasn't been working, what can we do to improve our security and help minimize the threat from both malicious insiders and external attackers and actually protect our data? So, first off, given the last slide, I'm not suggesting you should replace your firewall or your antivirus or your legacy security tools. Just to give an example, I recently moved to Texas, and one of the first things we did was we installed a fancy alarm system with motion sensors, etc. But we still have a front door in our house, and partly because there's some pretty big bugs in Texas. But my point is, you don't want to necessarily get away. I'm not advocating getting rid of that stuff, but there are also a lot of new tools and techniques available now that can help strengthen your front door and make it harder for the bad guys to get in. And we've been tracking a number of new vendors in the past year or so that can help provide protection beyond what your basic firewall or your signature-based AV can provide. Things like next-gen firewalls, malware sandboxing, network deception techniques, etc. There's probably at least 100 vendors in some of these newer areas. Now, while many of these techniques can greatly improve your ability to keep the bad guys out, as we've learned over the past few years, no security tool is 100% effective. It's really no wonder then why phishing is so common. Even if you block 99.999% of phishing attempts, all it really takes is just one compromised user or one person to click on a bad link, and it can compromise your entire network. So we're starting to see, one of the things we're seeing anyway, is we're starting to see a greater emphasis on detection and incident response and things like that. And the idea is that, as I mentioned earlier, if we can't detect and block everything, the next best alternative is to detect it much more quickly and close the window of exposure. Another thing that we've seen that's actually been around for years but is starting to receive more attention these days is, thanks to Edward Snowden and the NSA, is privileged password management. And the basic idea of privileged password management is to make it harder for the bad guys to get their hands on privileged credentials, and we can manage the request, the approval, the rotation of passwords, etc., and also provide the ability to set policies, such as when and where privileged passwords can be used, what time of day, what location, etc. We're also starting to see an increase in popularity and interest in encryption. And encryption has historically been done for things like laptops and email, but we're starting to see increasing interest in using encryption for things like files and critical servers, databases, and even cloud applications. And there's actually been a fair amount of M&A activity going on involving encryption vendors recently. We've seen a number of acquisitions in the space which should somewhat point to the growing importance of using encryption. But again, like other tools, depending on how the encryption is implemented, it's possible that either a rogue DBA, a database administrator, could gain access, or someone who could gain access to a database administrator's credentials could somehow get access to the data, depending on how it's implemented. Another thing we've seen a lot of interest in threat intelligence and analytics is the big buzzword in security these days, and also traditional SIM tools. And while SIM tools can be a great way to increase visibility into what's going on in your network, they're also only as good as the data that goes into them. Basically, garbage in, garbage out. I remember from my old computer science classes. Most SIM tools usually see mainly logs from firewalls, intrusion prevention devices, next-gen firewalls, etc., which is all fine, but typically that info can only tell you what's happened long after an attack and when your data is long gone. And then one of the challenges is a lot of these devices are blind to what's going on at the file and server level. So, in the event an attacker gets past your first line of defense, they have license to do whatever they want to do and can remain undetected for a long time. So, I'll stop there going through techniques because really there's a whole long list of techniques I could go through. But the point is there are a lot of new things available to us these days to help us increase our security, and all of them have their strengths and weaknesses. So you really need to think about combining them and combining a variety of techniques to improve your overall security and minimize the chances of data breach. But I just want to make one thing clear. This isn't just about defense in depth and layering on more and more security tools. We've been hearing about defense in depth in the security industry for years, and while it's certainly fine to cover as many bases as you can, at some point you run into diminishing returns. And most importantly, there's still gaps between those different products that attackers can exploit. So it's really becoming critical to make sure all your existing security tools play nice with one another and they complement each other and aren't just another widget to manage or another pane of glass for your admins to worry about. And one of the things we've been seeing lately with a lot of vendors is partnering to help fill those gaps. And as one example, we're seeing malware sandboxing vendors sharing information with next-gen firewall vendors. We're seeing DLP tools sharing information with malware vendors. And as Charles and Nina will shortly tell you, we're also seeing encryption vendors sharing information with database activity monitoring and SIM tools in order to get a more complete view of what's going on in your network. So really at the end of the day, the main point I really wanted to leave you with is that what's really needed is visibility into what's going on across your entire network, not just at the endpoint and not just at the perimeter, but you need to have visibility into what's taking place on your critical servers. You need to be able to identify insider threats such as malware, APTs, and maybe taking advantage of privileged user credentials or privileged user accounts, etc. So that's pretty much it for me. With that, I'll turn it back over to Nina and Charles, and they can tell you both how Intel Security and Vormetric can help you improve your ability to protect your structured and unstructured data.
Sure. Thank you so much, Garrett. And I got to say, the idea of someone calling me, a third party calling me and telling me I've been breached literally makes me shudder. That's terrifying. Would not be a good day to receive that phone call. So thank you for that presentation. And just wanted to go through a couple of more points Charles and myself would like to cover. Again, I am the product manager for Intel Security SIM, and Charles is the Senior Director of Marketing for Vormetric. I'm going to just want to go through and describe a little bit about the relationship that we currently have with Vormetric. Vormetric has been a Intel Security SIA partner for less than 18 months. They are integrated currently with two of our products, our database activity monitoring and our Intel Security Enterprise Security Manager. Vormetric recently was awarded the Rookie Partner of the Year at our Focus Conference in Las Vegas. This is due to how proactive they have been and what an engaged partner they have been. So they're doing a fantastic job of going above and beyond for our mutual customers. And
Great.
so I'll let
Thank
Charles
you.
take over from here.
Great. Thank you, Garrett, for the introduction and setting up the situation that the market's in. And Nina, thank you for the introduction as well. So we want to talk about taking a structured approach to protecting our data. And when we think of structured data, we think of the database itself. And there are solutions out there that focus on protecting the database, things like TDE or tokenization. But what we have to keep in mind is where there's a database, there's always a collection of unstructured files as well. And these unstructured files are of a lot of value in attacking the database. They could be things like systems logs or error logs that have a rich set of information that a hacker could use. There's configuration files and temp files that can be compromised to gain access. And then, of course, we generate lots of reports from these databases, and these reports are often in the form of unstructured data. And any enterprise environment is going to have just a large collection of unstructured data in general. So whether it's your Word docs, your video recordings, Excel files, we all have a lot of unstructured data, and much of this contains sensitive information that somebody's going to want to take. So when we look at securing a database, so let's just start with the database itself. There's two attack vectors. You could either take the data from coming in the front door, as Garrett talked about, and that would mean people who have authorized access to the database. But perhaps they take advantage of that and they start looking for their girlfriend's, information, or they're looking for the tax data from, the stars or celebrities, or information that people have checked into a hospital so they could take this data and sell it. Or they do huge amounts of downloads trying to steal data. It could be a cyber attack, someone who compromises an endpoint and then using that person's authorized access to gain data. It could be a DBA who has authorized access, or some malware that took over the DBA credentials, taking access, or SQL injection. So this is the type of attacks that Intel Security has a suite of products to address. So these tools could help you find out what databases exist. That's a problem. A lot of people don't even know what databases are out there in their environment. And then give you awareness of what the user and right setups are. And then specifically to solve a lot of these types of problems, there's data activity monitoring capabilities and access controls to prevent a lot of these front door attacks. But that is not enough security, because many of the attacks come from what Garrett set up as the back door. This is when you have someone copying the entire file. At the end of the day, the database is typically a file, unless it's written to a raw volume. If someone steals that file, then they could steal the data if it's unencrypted. If someone's accessing that database at the root level, you want to have awareness of that. So what you need to do is encrypt that data and make sure you have strong key management to fully protect your database. So let's look at how we would do that. So we want to protect the database, and we want to protect all that unstructured data. And to protect it, encryption alone is not enough. As Garrett was talking about, you also must have privileged user access controls, because you don't want someone with root access, which is often malware or APT using the root credentials, to then take advantage of their capabilities to copy his data, send that data home, change logs that might be informing who's accessing the data. And then, of course, you want access security intelligence. You want to know who's accessing that data, whether they're authorized for accessing that data or unauthorized for accessing that data. For example, if you consider Snowden an analyst, he should have had access to all that data, but the NSA would have been in a much better position if they knew which data Snowden had accessed, because right now they have no idea what's going to come out next. If you consider Snowden a system administrator, then there was no reason for him to have access. And if the NSA had encryption, privileged user access control, and security intelligence in place, they would have been in a much different situation. So let's start by looking at one of the biometric products that we're going to apply here. And that product's called Biometric Transparent Encryption, and it's part of the Biometric Data Security Platform. And what this product is an agent. This agent runs at the operating system level. It supports Linux, Unix, and Windows file systems. And you could have 5, 10, hundreds, thousands, 10,000, 20,000 of these agents in all kinds of different physical and virtual servers. All the policy and key management for these agents is centralized in what's called the Biometric Data Security Manager. And this Biometric Data Security Manager could be a virtual appliance, or it could be a FIPS 140-2 Level 3 key manager. So depending on your security profile, Biometric can meet those needs. So once you have these agents in place, it's going to apply policies that you set up in the DSM of who's allowed to access the data when they're allowed to access the data, and very importantly, what processes or applications are they allowed to use to access that data. So think of it as a whitelist. Because if you have a database, there's no reason for someone to open that with MemoPad. So why would you even allow that? Equally important, it stops access for privileged users. And I'm going to give you a demo of that so you see exactly what I'm talking about. But this is like a root user. You may want them to be able to copy and move files, perhaps do a directory or ls command, but do you have any reason for your system admins to see what's in the database, to see what's in those unstructured files? Typically not. Now, whenever you have a file system solution, there are those people that could get below the file system. Let's say someone steals the hard disk or gets disposed of incorrectly, or it's a virtual machine and you have hypervisor admins or cloud admins, and they could get right to the storage. Well, in that case, there's no concern because the data is encrypted. So that's encryption and access control. And equally important is the security intelligence. And this is where the integration comes in with the Intel Security Enterprise Security Manager. Every time someone tries to access your data, unstructured or structured, authorized or unauthorized, we're going to create a log. Now, that could be a lot of logs, especially when you consider all the perimeter security in place. It's a lot of hay we're producing. So how do you find those needles in the haystack? And this is where Intel Security Enterprise Security Manager comes into place. So, Nina, can you tell us about this product?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So a couple of key points about our Enterprise Security Manager. So you can see here on the screen the word intelligent. We are taking in logs from all over your network, your Windows logs, your firewall logs, your you name it, we're taking it in. And at that point, we are parsing the logs and correlating them to give the administrators alarms, essentially. An alarm goes off that indicates some type of malicious activity is going on in your environment. And those alarms are exactly products of correlated events that we have found using our engine. These alarms are actionable. So you can use our customizable dashboards to make responding to these alarms simple. We also allow for long-term storage of the log. And down below you can see the integrated piece. We have several third-party vendors that we integrate with. The SIA partners are key to that integration. And so that is the kind of big picture that I wanted to go over. Here on this slide, I won't bore you too much with the analytics of it, but it is important to see the different pieces of our product and what each one does. So what I'll start with is the receiver. The receiver is a required piece of the SIM. So what it does is it's the piece that takes in the logs, it takes in the events, it receives them, it parses them, it normalizes them, and then enriches them. And the receiver sends that information to what I like to call the mothership, which is our ESM. This is your main dashboard, your main view. This is where you can add in devices and configure them. This is where you will see your custom dashboards. You can have filters for searching here. So again, the flow in is for everything comes into the receiver and then is sent to the ESM. Now that's going to be the most basic setup that you could have. So some of the add-on items, the first one would be our Enterprise Log Manager. This allows for long-term log storage. So if you have, whatever kind of requirements that you have by law to to keep certain log files for a certain amount of time, this is how you would accomplish that goal. Now, you can take in events from the receiver and send them only to the log manager. They don't have to go to the ESM where you want to view them and act on them immediately. If you want to just use this for long-term log storage, you can do that. And then on the right, you'll notice we have various storage formats that we support. And so whatever works best in your environment, you can feel free to use that with our Enterprise Log Manager. The next piece that I wanted to go over is our Advanced Correlation Engine. The Advanced Correlation Engine is what gives you that, it's what puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. So we take events from various places, correlate those together, and then basically give you an end result. Here is the big picture. With the, we call it the ACE. With the ACE, you get 280 rules out of the box. You can create your own custom rules, and we actually use a very simple drag and drop methodology to create the rules. There are some other SIMs out there that use their own language. Ours is a little bit more, I don't want to say basic, but it's a little bit easier visually, I think, to use with the drag and drop option. The last couple of items, we have the Application Data Monitor. This monitors your Layer 3 and Layer 7 traffic. And then we also have our Database Event Monitor that monitors database events. So that's the basic big picture diagram of how things work and where things flow. So again, the key pieces are the receiver and the ESM. Those are what's required in order to have this running. And I'm going to let Charles take back over. He's going to do a quick demo for us. So.
Yeah, thanks, Nita. So I think the best way to understand how these two products function together is by looking at a demo. So what I want to do is show you how we created a couple of logs. And in one of these logs, we're going to have a root user or someone using root user credentials. This could be an APT. And they're not going to be able to gain access to the database. So they are going to try using a switch user command and behave like the Oracle database administrator, because that user is going to have access to the database. So what we did is, just from the shell, we have different users. And I'll point out those users in a moment, but you could see we went from a root user to a switch user command, become the Oracle user, and then try doing the cat command. So taking a little bit closer look at this. So we have our root user, that this person is trying to do a cat command. The biometric transparent encryption agent has a policy saying root users should not be able to do any kind of read command. They have no reason to do that to our files. So when they try to read all our files, and there's 3 of them here, classified A, B, and C, they're getting permission denied. So then the person attacking it, the root user, is doing a switch user command. And now the system believes that they're the Oracle user, and they try the cat command again. Still, permission is denied. Now, each of these attempts are creating logs. Those logs are being sent to the Enterprise Security Manager. And do you want to give us a quick rundown, Nina, about what we're seeing here?
Sure. Yeah, so what we're looking at here is an example of what a dashboard may look like for an administrator. So you've got event categories and event counts kind of on the left that you can see. Now, if this were active, for example, you could click on that item that says event, and drill down into it and see the individual users that perhaps created that event.
Well, I'm going to show an example of that.
Sure.
Okay, so we have you can see there's a lot of different widgets and charts here that are going to give you all kinds of information about the different logs that are coming in. So what is deeply text-heavy and something that's very hard for a human to process now becomes very visual and graph-oriented. So you could quickly pull out big events like denied access from root users, because why is your root user trying to gain access? And with the correlation engine, as Nina explained before, you could then create alarms. So in this case, we created an alarm based on a root user trying to fake being an authorized user. So I kind of try to zoom up here a little, but your security administrator is going to get this alarm, and they could choose to acknowledge this alarm or find more details. Now, this details is incredible because, like we were saying, there's all these logs. You got to find that needle. What's creating that situation? And I know these logs are probably very hard to read on your screen, but let me tell you the kind of stuff that you get in here. So first of all, we know that access was rejected. And that's important because a lot of threat analytic tools say, I want you to know you just lost your data. It's on its way to Beijing. Now, it's really important to know you've lost your data because, as Garrett was talking about, often we don't know what that data is even leaving the premise, and we have to wait for that third party to tell us. So right away, data is not taken, access was rejected. But wait, there's more. We know which host is being attacked. So when you have a lot of physical machines, virtual machines, cloud environments, you know exactly which hosts are being attacked. And often it's going to be multiple attacks. We know the status. In this case, it's an alarm. And the policy that triggered this, in this case, is the policy that's on the data security manager itself, and it was called Protect Top Secret Documents. So we know what rules were violated. Now, this is super valuable right here. We know who's doing the attack. We could see that the user is a root user, and they're faking, so they've done a switch user or sudo command to be a user named Oracle. So that's right there, a lot of detail. So you either know it's insider abusing their privileges or your insider credentials were compromised. Then we know what files they're attacking, and really multiple logs were created here. We're just looking at one. We know they try to get classified A, B, and C. So this one is showing that classified A was under attack. And then the final message that I'm going to point out is this is the message that's then being sent out to the ESM, which basically says fake user denied. So this is the inform message. So this is incredible detail because right now, if you have a SIM product, you're probably very highly reliant on firewall logs, IPS logs, AV logs, NetFlow data, all really important stuff. But once someone's on your server, you probably don't have any visibility. This gives you visibility to that. And then when you connect it with all the other data in a tool like ESM, it gives you incredible forensic view of what's happening and who's accessing data and how they got into your network. It's very powerful stuff when you integrate these two solutions. So
it is. Charles, I just wanted to add one thing that I wanted to mention. We are in the process of working directly with Vormetric on creating what we call a content pack. So this is something designed specifically for Vormetric customers that will give them pre-made correlation rules that involve Vormetric data and correlate it, predefined alarms that could include Vormetric detection, predefined reports that would generate for compliance so you could view the Vormetric activity in a report. And so just wanted to mention that we are in the process of working directly with Vormetric to develop that content pack for our mutual customers. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. And this is great because, let's face it, security is hard. There's a lot of aspects, a lot of attacks, a lot of attack vectors, and we're going up against some formidable opponents, nation states, 50-year-old teenagers that have nothing but time, sitting in Ireland, which is what just happened with Talk attack. And so anything that could be done to make it simpler, more efficient to deploy these types of solutions, to raise visibility while actually protecting the data, that's just goodness. So the kind of work that Intel Security is doing with us is just incredible value for the customer. So I just want to wrap this up. So let me talk about the Intel Security and Verimetric solution combined and how that delivers a comprehensive database protection. So remember, we're protecting the database from abuse of unauthorized access. From the front door, that's what Intel Security is offering, and then from the back door, people stealing the data at the privileged user level, that's what Verimetric is delivering. So you have protection from SQL injections, DBAs, abusive users, and protection from APTs, malware, root users that might be taking advantage of their capabilities. In addition, when you have these kinds of capabilities like encryption, key management, privileged user access control, file level monitoring, being able to load it up into a way to easily make it visible and be able to report to your compliance office, this is going to help you meet many internal and external type of compliance needs. And lastly, what I want to point out is that the integration between Intel Security ESM and the Verimetric Security Intelligence logs delivers you very early warning that something suspicious is happening in your network. It gives you the forensics of how they got in and how they're trying to get out of your network, how long maybe they've been in your network trying to gain access to those internal servers, because you combine it with all the perimeter security data that you're collecting into the SIM tool as well, and then the reporting, being able to create security reports, compliance reports quickly and easily. And when you combine this with securing the structured databases and all the unstructured data we talked about that surrounds any database, you really have a structured security approach to protecting your structured and unstructured data. So we have a lot of stuff to help you learn more. Two things that I do want to point out is a joint solution brief. You could download that right from here, and of course you could find it on both our websites, and this talks about our joint solution. We have one that focuses on the Verimetric Security Intelligence combined with the Intel Security Enterprise Security Manager product, and another solution brief that talks about how the product, Verimetric Transparent Encryption, works in tandem with the database security suite from Intel Security. Nothing beats a demo. I gave you a very short demo, focused on one specific use case, and I'm hoping that pulled all these pieces together for you. But we have a much more complete, richer demo available on YouTube. We'll make these slides available to you, but don't expect you to memorize that URL. That's right there for YouTube. But if you went on YouTube and you search for Verimetric space ESM, you'll get this pretty high up on your hits, and you can watch this demo.